Hi, everyone, and welcome to the sixth panel in the Film.Music.Media Symposium 2023 series. Today, we're talking to composers to discuss how they create musical themes that not only complement the story, but also enhance the emotional journey for the audience. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. First up, she is a composer, producer, songwriter, and artist known for projects like Better at Texting, Deathloop, Deja Vu, Fortnite Paradise, Sondheim series. Please welcome Alexandra Petkovski, or Alex, as you said. You're not in trouble.
Yeah, whatever you want to call me, honestly. It's totally, I've been called so many things. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining. Next up, he is the composer behind Johanna Enlists, Cobra Kai 2, Dojo's Rising. Please welcome Dan Light. Hey, Dan.
Hey, how's it going? Good to be here.
Good. Thanks for being here. Next up, she is an artist and composer known for her work on Three Ways. Please welcome EmmoLei Sankofa.
Hello. Nice to be. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks for being here. And last but not least, he is the composer behind Till Jail Do Us Part and Netflix's The Secret of the Greco Family. Please welcome Juan Enriquez.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thanks for being here. All right, so to start off, I love knowing people's kind of origin stories, kind of that catalyst moment in your life that triggered this interest in the careers that you have today. I'm wondering if there was anything like a film or TV score, or maybe it was something else outside of film and television that triggered your love for music that kind of brought you into this path. So I'm curious if you have that kind of moment in your life, and what was it? And EmmoLei, if you want to start us off with the conversation.
Amazing. So what's interesting about my journey is, number one, I've been a musician and just been in music literally since I was 2, which I started off singing in the choir in church, was a drummer in church, played in multiple ensembles from literally elementary school all the way through college. But what got me interested in film was I took a class, or I was a music recording major in college, and close to the end of my time in school, I had a professor listen to an assignment, and he's like, "Your work is really cinematic. I think that you should, investigate film scoring." And so from there, I kind of just went ahead and did that and went to SCAD and explored film scoring, production sound, post-production sound, everything, sound design, film music. And that's kind of, what led me here. But I mean, subconsciously, I think film music was always in my sphere. My mom played violin, so she was always playing a lot of classical works for me growing up. Peter and the Wolf is really where I learned motifs without realizing it. So yeah, it's been in me and around me for a long time, but that was like the point at which I got the light bulb.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it seems like you're surrounded from you couldn't escape it, I feel like. Alex, how about yourself?
But before I launch in, I love Peter and the Wolf. That's awesome. Yeah. So good. My journey has been a little zig, a little zag. Nothing I find, at least for me, on my journey thus far, nothing has been necessarily direct and straightforward. There is the zig and the zag. So I'm no exception to this. My background came from a very classically steeped landscape. I'm a piano player. That's my primary instrument. And so I went through the Royal Conservatory of Music grades for piano, and then I did my Bachelor of Music, Master's of Music. It was like, can't shake this gal. She can't leave the music vein. I'm not really good at anything else though, so I go, thank you. I grew up in a very musical household in general too, and I think for me, music was always, it was just kind of always at the forefront of what I wanted to do. It was never really a question. And I was fortunate enough, my dad had a music studio. He was a music producer. So I grew up, I was that very weird, introverted, I'm still kind of introverted, kid with the mushroom cut, like the bowl cut haircut. And you have like a plethora of musicians coming in and out of the house space. And I just think from an early age, I was kind of exposed to it. It was very fortunate. I think it's only in hindsight you realize, oh, not everyone necessarily did that.
Yeah.
That's not the standard necessarily. So definitely very grateful for that. But yeah, and I think, gosh, there's a lot of film and TV. I love multimedia. I love film and TV. I think safe to say probably all of us, I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe all of us enjoy film and TV. And so, but for me, like Ennio Morricone, like Cinema Paradiso, I
Oh,
guess
yeah.
one of the first kind of iconic, you know, you're watching it. I watched it with my dad too. So there was this whole other layer of like emotional intensity. So anyway, for me, and my mom too, I feel bad. I feel like I've neglected. My mom's very musical. She's like doesn't do it professionally. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I guess that's a little bit about my journey. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, Ennio Morricone, of course, will trigger anything.
All the
uh,
yeah.
yeah. Juan, how about yourself? Todd, what started your journey?
I will say that after watching Jurassic Park, I was just like mind blown about that score. Like, how
Yeah.
could someone do that kind of beautiful music about dinosaurs? I was like, it was unreal at the time for me. And then growing up in Guadalajara, Mexico, we will get all the blockbusters. We don't get the indie films. Always get Bruce Willis and all the big blockbusters. So I was a fan of just movies in general, going with my parents to the movie theater with friends. And I was also a big DVD buyer, so I will like watch all the behind the scenes of everything all the time. Like sometimes even before the movie, watching the movie, I would just go watch the behind the scenes first. And I got interested because of that in the film scoring career, to the dismay of my parents, because my mom is a doctor and my dad is an engineer, businessman. So I was supposed to be a doctor. So I researched and realized I could study this at Berklee College of Music in Boston. So I got my mindset into going there and pursuing this career. So I'm still going at it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember seeing Jurassic Park in the theaters, and they had like a kid's like storybook or something, and I literally was just checking to make sure the scenes were matching up with like whatever the stills are. Dan, how about yourself?
Yes, so I grew up playing guitar, from a young age, from around 9, and I was always, I was like rocking out to Pink Floyd as like a 12 and 13-year-old, and that was kind of how like my musical journey began. I studied music in school, and after school I came out to LA with the intent to, my original thought was I was going to produce pop music, and that was the thing I wanted to do. That's what I came here to do. I never really even knew film composing was a thing you could do. I never really met a film composer, to be honest. I mean, I grew up on the East Coast, and I'm sure, anyone here who didn't grow up in LA, maybe it's like, you don't always meet a film composer like walking down the street or know what that looks like, or, oh, you could have like a real job kind of, this is like you can be a musician, but it's like, this is a job too, And so when I came out here, I met all these, amazing composers and people who had been doing this for a living. And I was like, oh, wow. This is screw the pop music. This is what I want to do. Like I love it because I've been a huge film fan my whole life as well. And I think some of the scores that really kind of set a lot of this off for me, and this was around the time I started to kind of get into this, was some Hans Zimmer scores in specific. Actually, I think the score to Inception, that cue time at the end, when I heard that around, I think it was like 2010. I don't know, that was something kind of like a little bit of a light bulb moment, because it was like, oh, you can make an amazing film score, but you don't have to necessarily be John Williams to do it, or it doesn't have to sound like that. It was sort of like a little bit of a light bulb moment. Yeah, so that's kind of what got me into doing all this.
I know you're saying I'm from Maryland, so I'm on the East Coast, and yeah, we went to film school, and then again, Hans Zimmer was a big thing for me. I'm not a composer, but it pushed me into film school and all that stuff. So I remember growing up on like The Rock and Crimson Tide and stuff like the 90s Bruckheimer stuff.
Absolutely.
Like, for like a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old boy, it was just like, but so I'm gonna jump in and talk to everybody individually. But I want to start off with Juan Carlos. Let's start off the conversation with your work Until Jail 2 Is Part. You recently gave Film Music Media an amazing behind-the-scenes look at your score for the show, so thank you for that amazing glimpse into your process. And if people haven't seen it, I'll put a link in the description below, so be sure to check that out. But I'm curious, how did you approach scoring the theme, and as it plays such an important role throughout the entire series? I'm curious what your kind of approach to that was.
Right. Well, to demo for that show, I was asked by the showrunners to come up with a theme. after my initial interview. So I was freaking out and trying to distill the essence of the show based on scripts that are based, and the show is about this group of women who their husbands are jailed because they're part of an organized crime in Miami, and they don't like each other, but suddenly have to work together to survive in this new stage in their lives. And it's a dark comedy. So I had to reference like Miami and the high glamour of like people with a lot of money in Miami, and also Latin. So I ended up writing a very playful theme that was the essence of the women working together. It's like the theme instead of a particular character. So every time they're working together, the theme appears. And I arrange it in different ways, emotionally, playful, tense throughout the series, and it became a very recurrent character in the film. The tricky thing is that I went very chromatic. So for my musician and composer friends, it's very hard to make something chromatic sound emotional. So I really struggle with that. I put myself in a corner with that decision, but also gave it a very playful and maybe not the usual Latin theme to it. So that was a very playful. I had to put myself in a very playful mindset to come up with that theme.
Yeah. I mean, but did you know that you were going to have to do those variations of changing it throughout the series? Did you kind of, you mentioned that it was chromatic, but did you design it to be able to do those variations, or did you like?
No, I didn't thought I was going to have to do that at the time.
Right.
I thought this sounds cool like this in 30 seconds, you know?
Right.
I didn't.
So that was a later problem for you.
Yeah, it's like, oh,
that
like,
sometimes.
wow, I have to, make this emotional. And so I tried my best.
Yeah, no, I think you did an amazing job. So congratulations on the series and on your score.
Thank you.
But I want to jump over to EmmoLei. You did something so interesting for your upcoming project, Three Ways. You incorporated Morse code into your score. What was your inspiration behind that, and how did you use that to drive the narrative?
So thank you so much for that question. I actually started using Morse code in my work when I did an EP called Geometry. And it's basically, it was an EP based on, like, all of the songs were shapes, the titles were shapes. And so I had finished the entire project and I was listening back to it, didn't feel like it was cohesive. And I was like, hey, let me just try building out the interludes using Morse code. And that's where I started developing like my Morse code technique, where I use and leverage Morse code as a language to build out motifs. So I did this in Three Ways, but I also do this in a lot of my other films that I work on as well. But I'm a percussionist. Like, Morse code is very percussive. And so even though the score for Three Ways is percussive, I still leverage Morse code to build out melodic lines and things that are distinct. And I find that it's easier to develop motifs and themes, especially ones that have meaning, when you can spell out character names, places, like you can do anything. And so with Three Ways, the dominant motifs spelled out the number 3, the word 3, and then threesome. So I pretty much did this like entire score on the drum set. Pretty much everything was percussive. I had guitar and stuff in there throughout, but the base of the score was actually like drum set, a lot of auxiliary percussion, vibraphone. I used a few synths like 808s and stuff like that. But I mean, that's pretty much where that came from. And it's just been a really fun way to, like I said, attach meaning to the characters and to the themes that are within, the work.
That is so fascinating. I mean, I've never even heard anything like that. I'm curious, what was the initial spark that do you know? Do you have any familiarity with Morse code before that triggered you to bring that into music, or what triggered you to initially go there in the first place? What was that inspiration?
It's really just me following my curiosity. And like I said, I don't know, like, even the initial thought with incorporating it into my EP, something just told me, like, just see what happens with Morse code. Because actually I've played around with it a lot, but I just never thought about incorporating it into my music. And so when I did that and I just saw the results, I'm like, wait a minute, this can translate to film scoring, because I feel like a lot of times, sometimes, composers, we get stuck sometimes trying to find and develop themes and motifs. And so when you have a language to go to like spell things out or to just give you that initial jump start, and you can build things out melodically, you can do a lot of crazy progressions and all these types of things, but at least you have the rhythm. And even sometimes when I test certain like spellings out, maybe it's too long to create like a really distinct and succinct motif, because the other thing is like motifs and themes are supposed to be memorable, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
And so the other thing is like I learned with Hans Zimmer's masterclass, I just decided to watch that when he dropped that, and I never forgot him talking about like his process behind developing motifs and it being like a tune. If it's not something that somebody can like walk away and sing or just remember, it's like, dang, I don't know, does it work? You know what I mean? And so I always try to keep them very short and succinct. So sometimes I'll boil down the names of characters to like acronyms or pull certain things out that still give you the meaning of the character, or still align with the character in some kind of way, but it's not necessarily the full spelling. But sometimes it works. I just have to play with it. But I love it.
Yeah, that process must be so fun for you just to play around in there. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's so fascinating. I've never heard anything like that. That's crazy. I want to dive into video games for a bit. So, Alex, you have a wide variety of projects under your belt, including writing a song for the video game Deathloop. What was your process for writing its theme, Deja Vu?
I was gonna be like, what's my price? Ooh, let me tell you.
How much for that song?
Yeah, it was sorry, I'm still very fascinated, EmmoLei. The Morse code thing is so cool. Sorry,
I know,
I'm
it's
just
so cool.
like
thank you.
Just doing all that. That's really, really cool. Yeah, so I think in the scope and like the conversation, I think today anyway, just like thematically, what's a motive and how can that kind of overarch exist throughout any form of composition for media in general. I feel like really the succinctness, like EmmoLei, touched on, having it be earworm candy. And even actually, Dan, when you mentioned the pop music world, the original intention of going out to LA, I've dabbled as a producer in the pop realm, and as an artist, and I feel like it applies actually in that space as well. So when I created Deja Vu, this was the exact same principle, where you want to be able to have the listener's attention grabbed, lyrically, in addition to harmonically and melodically. I'm also a huge fan, and I just think collaboration in general, like for me anyway, the most fruitful projects have been a direct result of collaborative process. And I think I was just so fortunate to have gotten to work with Chris Kovacs, and the two of us were able to kind of spin ideas off of one another in terms of what could work thematically for Deja Vu in the greater landscape of this video game, which for anyone who is less familiar, it's basically, if you've seen kind of Groundhog Day, great classic film. If you haven't, you should do that too. But it's this cyclic kind of nature where again and again, the main character Colt wakes up every day and is stuck on this island, and he has to kind of get through all of the events of the video game. And if he doesn't do it in time, it restarts itself and another day begins. So it's set in the 70s as well, or it's very reminiscent of the 70s. And we went with a very Bond-esque sort of direction with the theme as well, and that was a big factor. And I loved it because it really enabled me to play in a space that sometimes it feels self-indulgent. I'm just going to create like a Bond song, so this was like a real intention, and this is why I'm doing this, not just for my own self. It's not a good enough reason. So getting to play in that space was very rewarding, and ultimately it was about threading the needle in terms of what is going to grip the listener and the experience of the gamer themselves, but also help tell the story. So Deja Vu, maybe I do. The meaning behind Deja Vu, like the definition is it already happened. So this was sort of the concept lyrically, and then that expanded into what we did musically. And there's I mean, calls to big brass, soaring strings, and then also this electronic presence to help, capture the momentum. I work a lot in the trailer space, like the trailer world as well. So whenever you're, I think with a hook, if you have a compressed amount of time, it's really about how can we tell this story as effectively with the time that we're given. So with any project, whether it's an hour project where you can, stretch it out and really unfold, coax the listener into the theme, or you have, this is a theme song, you have cap 3 minutes, go. It's about telling the story in the most compelling way possible. So yeah, it was a real treat. Yeah.
I mean, definitely was. I mean, the art direction of that game is fantastic. I mean, it's just incredible. Just giving you that canvas to inspire that. It's just, it's a fantastic game from, I think, Arkham, right? Arkham did it. It was an Arkham Studios game.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Yeah. Which is great. Dan, I want to jump over to you. You also scored a video game. How did you approach composing the music for the video game Cobra Kai 2 Dojo's Rising, which is based on the beloved franchise? Did you take any inspiration from the original Karate Kid films or the Cobra Kai series at all, or did you try to do something just brand new for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I I worked on the music on the video game with Zach Robinson and Leo Berenberg, who are the composers of Cobra Kai. So they are kind of across like all the Cobra Kai stuff, so that it's very authentic to kind of the original vision for the show. And one of the cool things about the music for the show is Zach and Leo are both really big video game music fans, and a lot of that has kind of seeped into the show just because of the music influences they love, and there's this kind of whole 80s aesthetic, and it all sort of ties together. And we all love the score to like Streets of Rage video game, or like the Power Rangers video game on the Super Nintendo, and all these things are like things that actually are they find their way into the Cobra Kai show, but also the video game as well. And in the video game, it's sort of like this weird cyclical thing where the show is influenced by games so much, but now we're doing a game that's based on the show. So it's like it kind of ends up being this one big like love letter to video game music in a way, but all sort of like filtered through like the Cobra Kai palette, which is all kind of like rock and kind of hair metal and power metal and and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a lot of sort of kind of like taking inspiration from some of our favorite games and kind of putting them in like the Cobra Kai-ify, all of it, and I particularly really love I'm a big gamer, so I'm big into all that, and I really love all the music from the Final Fantasy video games. So we did a couple pieces, and there was a specific piece that I wrote that was like a boss fight theme, and I really just love like boss fight music. There's just something about it, especially like from the Final Fantasy games. So I got to really just like flex my muscle, be like, okay, I want to do like a Cobra Kai version of a Final Fantasy boss fight, and that's basically what I did. And it turned out really well, and that was sort of a very kind of exciting, creative thing to do.
That's awesome. The Final Fantasy scores are just amazing, and I've actually been on a kind of video game fix. I've been going back and watching all these like orchestras doing like Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong and all these things. I actually just did a retrospective with Graham and Grant looking back at GoldenEye 64, and we were just nerding out about the early days of Rare, which is how they try to break into that. They had no idea what they're doing out in the English countryside. They had no idea they were making one of the most iconic games. It's so funny.
Well, something about the game music that I love is it's classically very kind of like melodically focused. They're almost like little songs, and it's sort of like an opportunity to like for me flex some of that the stuff I originally came out here to do, like kind of produce songs in a way. So it's a little bit it's a way to kind of get some of that stuff.
And it has advanced so quickly and so fast as technology, from when we were kids to now, what you can do with a game score versus looking back at Mario or just the Game Boy and stuff like that, which is absolutely crazy. But I want to open up to another kind of go around the room type thing of question. I know we talked about when we talked about the first question about maybe some inspirations of what got you into film music, but I'm curious if there's any other examples that you can pull from your memory of films that have a score that really drive the story forward, that's really kind of pushing it forward. I know we mentioned like time from Inception and Jurassic Park, but I'm curious if there's anything that, like specific scores that live in your mind and your heart that really just like it makes the film, and without the film or without the score, the film is nothing. So I'm curious, EmmoLei, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, so this isn't a film, this is a TV show, but this is actually something that came out more recently, but I really love the score to Flight Attendant on HBO, Blake Neely.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That score is probably one of the most distinct and one of the most interesting scores that I've heard in a while, like in a TV show. And it's very bold and risky. Because that is very like percussive, and I think Blake used the prepared piano for that score as well. So it's just, I love that score. Like that's definitely top of mind. And I think even Black Panther, I really love the way that is built. The themes, I love the way that the themes are built for the characters. And how they evolve over time. And to be honest, what's interesting about that score is that it actually reminds me of how the themes are built out for the Star Wars movies, just in terms of how they grow and develop and change really beautifully over time, over the course of the films. But yeah, those are my top two. And also Devotion, which is another recent film that just came out. Chanda Dancy did that score as well. But those are like my top three that I think. Yeah. And I love, it's a hybrid score. I really love the blending of like the traditional classical elements in addition to the incorporation of like the newer elements, the electronic, and Ludwig does that very beautifully too with Black Panther. Like I love just
Yeah.
No, yeah, Shonda, I feel like overshadowed from Top Gun last year, but that thing. But like her score was so good. I interviewed her. It will be coming out the next issue of the score for the winter. So definitely look for it in there. But we talked about Devotion and broke it down. It was absolutely stunning. Juan Carlos, I'm curious about you. Any other examples outside of Jurassic Park?
Well, two or three come to mind. One of them is Band of Brothers, a miniseries by Michael Kamen. I loved how he approached that miniseries, and the use of music was just on point on where it comes in, what mood is it showing, like the sorrow, the sadness, the horror, the camaraderie, nostalgia, everything. It's just so on point of how he approached that miniseries, and the main titles, of course, the end titles, everything I love about it. Another one is John Powell, How to Train Your Dragon. I'm a fan of John Powell, everything.
Yeah,
it's one of my biggest influences, and he's just a master of thematic writing and how to orchestrate it and just propel the story forward, like we're talking about. So effortless his writing feels like. That's probably all of you have probably bought the score, and I'm like, how did he do this? Like, I'm trying to make mental note. Okay, I'm gonna take this Woodwinds Flourish for later. This is mine for later. and also recently I had the pleasure and honor of working on Maya and the Three, a Netflix miniseries with themes by Gustavo Santolaya and score by Tim Davis. I was hired to work on them as an additional composer and more on the Latin stuff, more Mexican ethnic regional aspect of the soundtrack. And Gustavo wrote some incredible themes, and Tim, it was like interesting to see the separation of like the themes by Gustavo Santolaya and the score by Tim Davis, and how Tim use the themes to propel the story forward on each episode. And then I also had a little bit of chance to like, I'm gonna borrow this from Gustavo and this from Tim, and try to also push the story forward for my scenes. So those are a few examples that come to mind.
Yeah, Gustavo's so interesting. I interviewed him too, and he specifically likes to write away from picture. He likes to.
Same.
That's his process. He likes to go away. Yeah, and then he just takes it, and then you conform it. But writing away, he says he gets so much more just letting it flow out of him. That's
on that score there was a lot of like music editing of the stems of Gustavo, and so they used it against picture. But yeah, he sent all this like batch of themes that really captured the essence of each character based on only like artwork and stuff like that. So it's impressive, and something I'm learning from.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are great examples. Alex, how about yourself?
I think the John Powell thing is definitely resonates for me. I was studying at one point the score for Chicken Run. I feel like it was Chicken. I love Chicken Run, a phenomenal film. Anyway, Gregson Williams, John Powell. And I think the interweaving of the thematic content, also orchestrating it. I just wrapped a Los Angeles film conducting intensive recently. So like I really, looking at orchestration and just from the standpoint of the gamut of the orchestra and what works, what doesn't work, and being able to interweave that fabric seamlessly, I feel like is something it's a real skill set. And so, and with Chicken Run too, it's actually paying homage to like Elmer Bernstein, like The Great Escape.
Yeah, The Great Escape. It's
So
very
it's
Great
kind
Escape.
of like a nugget within a nugget, which is just really, really I think there's some serious skill sets behind that. So I think that's really cool. But yeah, I think recently, I think the White Lotus,
Yeah.
Cristobal Tapi de Vere, he's from Montreal too. So I'm kind of the Canadian. So I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah. So I just think the exploration and experimentation and being able to use yodel. I'm a vocalist as well. So whenever I hear the use of vocals, like Emile Masseri too, and Kajillionaire, the use of vocals and how they're manipulated, so they don't necessarily sound like vocals. It's fascinating and just very, very effective. So yeah, I'm really excited right now more than ever. I think the landscape is just like in some regards there are always going to be ceilings, but they're there to punch through. Here's my ceiling, I guess.
That White Lotus, the main title, just when it kicks off, and then his co-composer in the second season was she was, I think, his assistant. I can't remember her name right off the top of my head, but she did a fantastic job with the stuff on that. He told me it was Mike White wanted Hawaiian Hitchcock, and that's what he came up with. So I was just like, what?
I love it. Oh, yeah.
But Dan, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think in recent years, a score that has really, I think, grabbed me is Johnny Greenwood's score to the film Phantom Thread. And I just I love everything Johnny Greenwood. I'm obsessed, and he's one of my favorites for sure. But that score in particular, I love because I think he does a really cool thing where he kind of is like limited to a sort of like almost like period accurate palette in a way, but then and some of the music is very romantic, but then a lot of it is very kind of minimalist and modern, and using kind of like musical devices that remind me of like Radiohead, but just the palette and the instruments are not, and it's kind of this like chamber music thing. And I think that kind of device of using a certain sort of ensemble, but then writing something that is like kind of modern or not what you would think of when you think of that ensemble is very cool. It's something I've tried to do in my own work as well, and that's sort of like to me a little bit of a guiding light sometimes, is thinking about that score and how he kind of creates that. But also it's cool too because I feel like I said, it reminds me of Radiohead. Well, he's part of Radiohead, and it's just cool that he has such a voice that he can write for all these different things, but you can kind of really like feel that it's him doing it. I think that's a very cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, those are awesome. I mean, that kind of, I love that. That's a nice rush of examples to kind of fuel our conversation into the next section. I want to jump back and talk about all your work again. So I want to, Juan Carlos, jump over back to you. You also composed Netflix's crime series, The Secret of the Greco Family, which has a completely different tone than Till Jail Duo's part. In the series, the house plays a major role. Can you walk us through your scoring process for an environment like the house?
Yes, so that like you said, it's a different score from Till Jail Duo's part. It's about these real events that happened in Argentina in the 80s, where a wealthy family had financial troubles, and they had the idea of kidnapping the kids of their friends, like high school kids and young kids, to ask for ransom money. And it happened in real life. So it was, and me from Mexico, where there's a lot of kidnappings happening and the cartels and everything. It was a really interesting story to pull music ideas from, and they keep the hostages in the house. So the house was throughout the series a big character basically of the series. So I, besides using traditional instrumentation, I use the sounds of locks, door locks being open and closed, doors being open and closed, chains also as percussive elements, and almost like musical sound design elements, that hybrid. there in the house there's a piano where the some of the characters are learning how to play piano, and I use the piano in a very disturbing way, kind of like an prepared piano kind of sounds, and just banging on the piano like it was like the hostages banging on the door. So that sort of I use elements from the house and also from the basement where the hostages were being kept as a recurring musical device through the score.
That's so fascinating. I mean, I love how how you can take something like that from the narrative and actually put it into your music to help support a narrative, this kind of cycle of things. And I love when that works and it can happen. So that's awesome that you're able to do that. Also, I want to mention also that, collaborating with directors on these projects is an important part of the scoring process. So EmmoLei, what was the dynamic like between you and the director of Three Ways, and how did that collaboration influence your score?
Yeah, so Jamal Dado is the director for Three Ways, and the collaboration process with him was actually very fluid. He emailed me and said that the reference for the film was Jackie Brown, which doesn't have a score. So I was like, okay, bet, it's wide open. This was my first comedy, by the way, and in the back of my mind, I immediately knew that I had to be very delicate with comedy, because comedy is kind of like a hit or miss with music. And so even just talking back and forth with him, and also he has very excellent taste in music, which is, well, I don't want to say that, but I feel like sometimes it can be rare with directors because it's a very scary process for them, the music part. And so the fact that he had very strong ideas, but he was willing to kind of let me experiment, and he trusted my musical voice, it made it very easy to kind of bring things to the table and just kind of go and push and just throw the pen at the wall and take the risk. And it just came out beautifully. And he also kind of, he didn't micromanage or just, ask me every 5 seconds, like, hey, what's this, what's that? It's just like, I'm gonna let you do you. And, I feel like that was just a really beautiful collaborative process. And even when it came to talking to him beforehand about what he liked musically, and even in the beginning when he sent me the cut, he had some stuff cut to picture, like some temp stuff cut to picture. Really, it was the syncs that we used in the film, which I thought was really interesting, which gave me an idea of like what his taste in music was. And I'm like, okay, I'm dealing with somebody who really knows music here. But yeah, it was very fluid. Probably one of my favorite collaborations to date. Like, Jamal is awesome.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, because I've heard stories where they've worked with composers work with a director, and the director is a musician, and that can be also a nightmare because they can come in and be like, start micromanaging and be like, oh yeah, no, do this and downshift to that, or use this minor third or blah blah blah. When they start, where instead I think what you're looking for is just their direction, what they are feeling, and then you translate that and into doing your process, which seems like he gave you the freedom to do that, which sounds awesome.
Yeah. I mean, he's a risk taker himself, and I just love working with people who are creatively bold. They like taking risks. They give you space to take risks, which with this score is pretty much, like I said, it's like drum set like Birdman was, you know what I'm saying? Plus or minus a few things. So, for him to give me the space to do that and to trust that things will work, or if they don't work, you don't know. Like when you're making something, you just don't know until you release it into the world. And so when we screened it at festivals, and even just now the response with it being out, the music itself is actually a character as well, which, like I said, Jamal gave me the space to experiment and explore. So yeah, that was a fun time with Jamal.
That's awesome. Dan, I want to jump over to you. You recently rescored the 1918 silent film Johanna Enlists for the Mary Pickford Foundation. How did you approach the challenge of rescoring a film considering the film is over 100 years old and it's silent? So I'm curious how you approach that, being a modern composer today, looking at something back from history like that, and what kind of techniques and approach did you take to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously, a bit of a crazy thing to think about, even approaching, doing, the Mary Pickford Foundation. They've been wanting to kind of restore a bunch of these old films, and finding composers to do new scores, and they specifically they hate silent film music. So the whole thing is, let's not make this silent film music.
Right.
But obviously, if you start doing like a synth score on a silent film, it starts to feel like some kind of exhibit, like an art museum. Yeah. So it's sort of a challenge of like, and that was the big question, even approaching this. How that was the big question for me, is how to even approach doing something like that.
Yeah.
And I guess the answer was, so the film, it's a rom-com, or at least the equivalent of a rom-com, in 1918, because things are a little different now, but it was under the banner of like a comedy, romantic comedy. Takes place on a farm, so, and there's like a sort of whole, the story is Johanna. She lives on a farm. She's sick of her boring life with her, farm, family, and she's looking for love. And then the second she's the most forlorn, a whole troop of soldiers marches onto the farm, and it's before they're shipping out to World War I, and they need a place to stay for a bit. And she gets in this like love triangle with some of the soldiers. So, I was trying to incorporate a few different things, and I think one of the things I was holding on to was this idea of the farm and the setting. So I kind of leaned into a bit of bluegrass music, and a lot of bluegrass music I love to kind of represent that. And then we have the soldiers, which has this bit of like a patriotic thing. So I kind of implemented a little bit of like Copland-esque Americana too. So it kind of has this two things going on, like this bluegrass and this kind of light orchestral kind of Americana type of stuff. And that was kind of the palette. And then to actually go about scoring it was obviously very overwhelming to have this 63-minute long stretch of just blankness, and got to just fill that with music. And I really did, to kind of bring it to the theme of this panel, it really was all about the themes. And I came up with a couple of themes at the outset, and I was really holding on to those things for dear life, seriously, because it was like every cue was one of the themes, and it kind of became a challenge for me of like, how far can I stretch and distort and like mangle and like abuse these themes to kind of like generate all this music that it like has this kind of backbone of something that's like, the same, and like, relating, and the themes for the characters are all, consistent. And it was sort of a really fun challenge to see like how far I could twist some of these things and kind of, iterate on these things for 63 minutes long. And, I don't think it gets boring with the music. Like, I think it stays fresh, but I really am repeating these themes constantly. So I think it's a cool testament to like, if you have a cool theme or a simple theme.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, is it's not make it something that's too complicated. It's very simple. You can like reharmonize it. You could change the meter. You could change the style. You can kind of do a lot of stuff to sort of abuse it, basically, to get, what you need. But yeah.
And I love that you're saying simple, because I feel like a lot of people might take that as like, oh, that's like a negative description of something, but it's like, that's the harder thing to do. It's to do more with less and shrink it down. It's easy to kind of throw everything at the wall and just see what works and just keep it there. But to do something more simple, and that's what as you mentioned, they're the ones that stick with you and they're more memorable for sure. Yeah.
And something I found is you just have a little more flexibility if the theme is simple. You can kind of like alter it more. You can kind of reimagine it more. You can reharmonize it more easily. Stuff like that. So
as opposed to chromatic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Juan,
what
is
too?
just simple next time.
I want to say something about the simplicity, because even like with aspiring film composers, like sometimes when you're really proficient just at music, you have this tendency to like overcompose or like try to communicate that you're really good. But what I've had to learn over time, especially with like film and TV, is that music is a design element. It's supposed to function a certain way. And so really the most beautiful things in life that function really well are the simplest. And that's what like I have to continue to remind myself, is like, people already know that you can make the music, but is it right? Does it work? Does it function properly? And so simplicity is like a huge thing. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because
Yeah.
That's important.
It is.
And that, yeah, that's a good point you're making too, because I think a lot of composers come out and they have, when you come out of college, you have a sense of ego maybe about yourself, but it's always about the film. And I remember Silvestri told me a story where on one of his first projects, he was like thinking he was kicking ass and doing things, and the producer pulled him aside. He's like, "What the hell are you doing out there? It's like, this is not about you." He's like, I remember that for the rest of my life, and that's how I've always, it's like you need to service the film, not yourself, but then the simplicity as well, for sure. So now, as we're nearing the end of our panel, I know I have to ask about what all of you are working on next. And Alex, I want to start with you because I hear you're working on the new documentary called "I Was Here," and I was wondering if you can tell us anything about it. Give us a little taste of what we can expect.
Yeah. What I can share is it's based on a woman's big life event that it really impacted her and her family, and it's a sensitive subject. And she had to undergo surgery, and it's about her reclaiming her body, the space that she's in internally and externally, how that translates. And I think from the thematic standpoint, in terms of talk of simplicity and the impact that simplicity can have if it transcends, it's been a process of using, I think the theme is like only a couple notes. Maybe it's like 3 or 4 notes, really. And then it's the unfolding of this little mini motive over the course of the journey of the story. And I think with anything, it's always about telling the story in the most compelling way. Absolutely. In documentaries or in real life events, I think there's a level of importance and significance surrounding respect of the content and respect of, it's not just a fictitious character. So honoring that and honoring that people, when they decide to share their story, there is great vulnerability in that. And so I think in terms of the music standpoint, it was, ensuring that honoring was present throughout, or is present throughout, actually, because we're in real time working on. And I've really been enjoying the process. The producer who brought me in on the project has personal relations to the lead. And so I think kind of my process of creating the theme itself was a lot of conversations, just surrounding, and they don't actually know music terms much. That's what they led with. And I think that was fine. That was great, actually, because if they could use colors or references external to the music world, a book or a show, anything that is evocative of a certain atmosphere or vibe, is great to go off of in terms of as long as there's like an energy, picking up and dialing into that frequency of that energy, I think is all that really matters, at least in this process for me thus far. And yeah, so I use some vocal elements. I can't help it, actually. I really can't help it. And it's really it's great. It's great. I like when I'm given space to play. I think that's a gift, but then also I don't like to think of it as parameters in a negative way. It's more the sandbox to which we are playing in, because sometimes I think when we're given certain this is the area to which we're going to be playing in, boundary you create out of I think was it Stravinsky is talking about like limitations and how actually we can, under duress or under the limitation of something, is born the most creative, hopefully profound ideas. And I kind of agree with that. I think sometimes in speaking to sometimes the ego self-indulgence aspect, it's very humbling to be working in a particular space or emotional palette, because you never really know what's going to come out of it, because out of sheer necessity. And so that's kind of been the process. It's playing the gift of the freedom to run and play in a space, but the space has been given. So that's been the process so far. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it. And I hope to do more in the documentary space, to be honest. It's been good taste. Good taste. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the doc space is amazing, and I've interviewed a bunch of amazing composers who've worked in that space, and it takes a little bit of nuance. And it's the same approach you're taking. You have your characters, which are your subjects, but it's real people's lives, and it's a real thing. So you do have to be respectful and all that stuff. But thanks for giving us a little in-depth look at that. I can't wait. But let's EmmoLei, let's jump over to you. Is there anything that you can talk about that we can look forward to, that without breaking any NDAs or spoiling anything, but is there anything we can look forward to?
Yeah, so I actually have quite a bit that I'm working on that will be out later this year. I can't necessarily say right now, but
Sure,
definitely
yeah.
please stay tuned and stream 3 ways on Hulu. And also check out, if you haven't, Lizzo's Watch Out for the Big Girls series. I did the music for that. Season 3, Step Up, I co-composed with Stephanie Economou. Horror Noir, AMC Plus, Shudder. You guys can go back and catch up, because I've been here for a minute, but I'm just now kind of like emerging and bubbling on the surface. So yeah, it's plenty of stuff for you guys to check out. But yeah, definitely please stream 3 ways on Hulu. That is going to be a fun time. Trust me.
Absolutely. Dan, how about yourself? Anything that we can look forward to?
Yeah, so a lot of the work I do these days, I work a lot with Zach Robinson and Leo Berenberg, doing a lot of additional music for them. Recently, we've been working a lot on, and we're wrapping up the score to the Peacock show Twisted Metal, which is based off the old PlayStation game. So that's something we're wrapping up. It's going to be fun. It's a fun show. I've had my hands in that for a bit, and it's fun. So stay tuned for that. And then I have a few other things. Unfortunately, I can't talk about, but as it is. But
as it is, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We'll keep a lookout for sure. We got a guest appearance by your cat, which this entire time my cat I've been silently with my feet pushing away.
Yeah.
He's under my desk right now.
It's the constant struggle.
Yeah. But Juan Carlos, if you want to tell us, what can we look forward to in your world?
Well, I can't say details or anything specific, but I'm really excited about this new project that's in the horizon for me, where I will be able to really lean into my Mexican heritage and lean into all the music that Mexico has to offer. That's usually not featured too much in US productions.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to push against the trend of the cliches of what Mexican music is, or at least what the audience thinks Mexican music is or sounds like. So I'm trying to be very authentic, and I'm grateful that the producers of the show are really interested in me bringing all this I will not say unknown, but just not as heard sounds and textures and instruments and styles of Mexican music to the US audience. So I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome. And it must be just creatively rewarding for you. That's just awesome. So I can't wait for that.
Yeah, it's very, very creative, rewarding for sure. Yes.
Yeah. So as we end our discussion, I like to leave, we have a lot of young listeners who are entering this field, who are just getting their foot in the door, getting started on their journey in this career. So I'm curious if you could give one piece of advice to a young composer who's maybe just out of college, or maybe even just thinking about going to college, or just, getting their feet wet. What piece of advice would you give after everything you've kind of seen in your career so far? So EmmoLei, I don't know if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, my piece of advice is just to find your own voice, because there are so many composers, and the best way to stick out is to have your own voice and have something that is distinct, that people know when they hear it, they know it's you. So that's definitely, that's my advice. No,
very good advice. Yeah. Be you, don't be somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alex, how about yourself? What piece of advice would you give to a young composer?
I think I heard this when I was a bit younger, although I think we're all still fairly young anyways.
Yeah, we're doing all right. We're not up there yet.
The skincare regime.
We've gotten our feet wet a little bit. We can give some advice.
I think I heard when I was a bit younger, and it stuck with me, don't compare your chapter 1 with someone else's chapter 30. And I thought that was very, to me at the time, it made an impact, because I mean, comparison is the thief of joy, right? Anyways, I think. you know, I think if you're going to compare yourself to somebody who's much further along in their career and then feel like, you know, a big dirtbag, you know, as a result, because you're like, not, how come I'm not, you know, there? I think kind of keeping that piece of advice in the back pocket and reminding oneself of that is really important. Also, just no one's going to give you permission to occupy space. No one's going to be like, I dub thee, you are this, go. So I feel like occupy space. Don't apologize.
Yes.
Go occupy space. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. No, I agree with that completely. I've been lately just discussing with people how it's important to remember how long it takes to, like, the whole chapter 30. Yeah. It, you know, our careers and anything here, it just takes, I knew coming here, moving out here, I was like, you know, and it gets tough because you see all your friends who had like business degrees and they're buying houses and BMWs and having kids, and you're still in a small apartment in North Hollywood. You're just like, when's it gonna, you know, but it does, and you just keep at it. And you know, I'm 10-11 years into living or doing this career in my career, so, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. You know, it's hard and it takes determination, but yeah, I agree with that whole don't compare your chapter 1 to chapter 30. That resonates big with me. Dan, how about yourself? A piece of advice?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think maybe, you know, two things I think about a lot are one, you know, I think being a composer can be a very kind of solitary thing in a sense. You know, you spend your day in your studio, you know, it could be long hours. And I think it's important to, like, despite all that, you have to get out in the world, you know, to meet people. And you know, a lot of the things like the best things I've worked on, a lot of the things that have brought me forward the most are the, you know, relationships I've made in just real life space, you know, through whatever means. But I think that's just really important, however that would apply, you know, to you. But, you know, and then the other thing too is I think it's what Alex said, you know, about just the time. You know, I think it just takes a long time. You know, I think it just, you know, it's, you know, if you, at least for me, it's like, I always feel like year after year, I look back, I'm like, oh, you know what? I did a lot this year. You know, even if I'm not doing like all the amazing things I, you know, set out to do originally yet, you know,
Chicken run too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's like, it's just kind of measuring, like, look, it's like you're playing golf, you know, it's like you're playing really against yourself. So it's sort of, are you making sure you feel like it's about your progress, you know, and what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Juan Carlos, why don't you finish us off? Any piece of advice that you would give to a young composer?
Well, this is something I'm still working on myself, and it's related to a bit of what everyone has said so far, is to trust your taste, your gut in what you're working on. Probably, if you like it, probably other people will also like it. Don't doubt it in the moment, just go for it. Because early in our careers, at least I was like emulating John Powell, emulating Hans Zimmer, emulating all these greats. And I was like sometimes hesitant, no, Hans Zimmer will not do this. So you know, to put an example. So I'm learning to let go of those like chains in my mind when I'm composing, and just do what I think works best, what I like, my taste. And that might be something strange. Sometimes I'm working on something and it's like, well, I've never heard this, other people do it, so it feels almost like, is it okay to do it, you know? But when I have done it in projects like My Agenda 3, everyone is like, oh, that was my favorite cue. So I'm still learning to trust my taste.
Yeah, I think all of us probably have worked on self-doubt and confidence and building that. And especially as a composer, you come in usually last minute or when everything is coming together and it's a mad rush and there's a lot of rejection involved. So it can always just, you know, hit you hard. And especially since music comes from here and you guys are being so vulnerable when you share things, it can always feel like something personal. But I always try to remember that, you know, in this business, you can't try not to take it personally. You can let it sting, you can let your feelings, you can feel, but you know, just, you know, but I love that you trust your gut and be you. And I think EmmoLei or Alex, you said something about at the beginning, like, don't try to be someone else, be yourself. And and EmmoLei, you talk about finding your voice, and I think that's just a very important thing, like, be yourself. But thank you everybody tonight. Thank you so much for being here, you know, for this amazing awesome discussion. So, I mean, Dan, Alex, EmmoLei, Juan Carlos, thank you so much for all your insight and your expertise and being open and just, it was just a great time. And I want to thank our friends at Impact 24 for helping co-produce this with Film Music Media and putting this panel together. And thank you all for watching. You can check out the rest of the panels at filmmusicmedia.com. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.